Hi, guys. I want to do something a little different for this show. I want to check in with you and have a heart to heart. Welcome to Freedom Talk. So here we are, September 2022. Midterms are coming up. We've been through a lot the past 2.5 or 3 years. We had one of the best economies ever under President Trump, and then the 2020 elections were coming up. I know a lot of people put a great deal of effort and hope into those. I was part of the convoys. I saw the enthusiasm, the flag waving. You probably remember all of these things. Then we had an election, and that election night, I was doing some figuring. I was at a dinner watching, expecting kind of how things always go, where there's a winner declared by the end of the night or projected. And as I was doing the numbers, I thought, that's it. Trump's won. There's no way that Biden can pull this off. Then the strangest thing happened, and you remember it. Everything went dark. All the stations went off. And the next morning, we woke up to find out that supposedly Trump had lost and Biden had won. I know this caused a great deal of depression in a lot of people that I knew. One friend of mine basically withdrew from life for a while, and I had to talk him back into having some hope. Another friend has some young adult children, and for one of them, it was the first time he had voted. And my friend Kevin had to work on encouraging his son and trying to explain what happened. So we're at this place now where we kind of have battle fatigue. Of course, we went through the whole COVID debacle, saw our businesses shut down, saw our lives forever changed, our kids taken out of school. A lot of collateral damage was done. I think more than just the virus itself. And we were very suspect of the origins of the virus. We were suspect of the statistics that we were seeing, and especially of that little doctor in the lab coat who can't seem to throw a baseball. And we've gotten the sense as time has gone on, and I think more people have woken up, that we're in a fight. We're in a battle. Some would even say a war. And I've been very aware of this for quite some time. I've seen things that other people haven't seen because I was working in healthcare research and reporting. So here we are. We are facing potentially the extinction of our country as we know it, loss of our freedom. And I know sometimes you can feel helpless. You can feel that battle fatigue and weariness. But I want to ask, how much does your freedom mean to you? I want to talk about freedom and sacrifice because the two are inextricably linked. And I'm doing this a little bit off the cuff, so I'm going to read to you a few excerpts from things I've been reading. I recently read this great book, Darkest Hour, and watched the movie. It's a great movie. Gary Oldman, I believe, won an Academy Award for his portrayal of Winston Churchill. And the movie centers on the start of World War II when Hitler and his Nazi military machine were rolling across continental Europe and starting to knock at England's door. The English people were afraid, and they had sent some 300,000 troops over to France to support the French. The French were completely routed. Hitler utilized his blitzkrieg or lightning war, and the island was directly threatened. They weren't sure if or how they could rescue basically the whole English army. Along with the English army, there were a number of French troops. So Winston Churchill had a problem, and some of the other ministers, some of the members of parliament, wanted to throw in the towel, negotiate with Hitler. They were all for peace and pacifism. And this movie does a good job of showing Churchill's struggle to overcome that opposition and become the person that he was, who was so known for his stance toward the war that we will never surrender. We'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight in the air, we'll fight them, and we will never surrender. But Hitler had to convince the members of parliament, he had to convince the public that they had to put everything on the line for their freedom, because the alternative was to surrender to slavery and servitude. And I wrote an article on this. I wrote an editorial that those who are subscribing to our Freedom Box, to our coffee subscription, that they'll get along with their monthly shipment, and a link to some other articles. So that's premium content. We would love to have your support. And just go to linktapgo.com/Kelly and you'll see how to subscribe. So I really unpack what happened there and how it relates to us today. I want to tell you too that later this evening, I'm going to interview my friend Ian Smith, who, the fellow with the big beard, the gym owner, who really stood up in defiance of tyranny. And we're going to talk about this battle fatigue. We're going to talk about what's required to gain our freedom, or to get our freedom back and to preserve it. And we're going to catch up with Ian and what he's doing. There's a nice thunderstorm queuing up outside, so if you hear that, it kind of gives a nice special effect for the show. But I wanted to read you something else. I picked up this book at a used bookstore recently, Killing England, and I try to get my hands on everything I can about the founding of this country and the people who sacrificed for us, who won our freedom. And I wanted to read to you a passage that describes what these people who were rebelling against the English crown were facing. And at first they were rebelling simply to get the king's attention and to have their grievances addressed. But eventually they went after the radical idea of independence, which at first many people had resisted. But I want to read to you what the penalties were for treason against the king. And I want you to think about right now what you're facing and what is required for us to preserve our freedom. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. High treason is considered the greatest capital crime a man can commit against the King of England. The punishment is extraordinary, ensuring a slow and hideous death. It will begin when the accused is tied to a horse and dragged to the gallows. He will then be hanged by the neck and cut down before he dies, so that he remains alive for what comes next. Doesn't sound so great, does it? What comes next, which is the slicing open of his abdomen and the burning of his intestines as they dangle outside his body. Only then will this general have his head cut off. They're talking about Washington had the king's forces overcome him and the Continental Army. His corpse will then be cut up into 4 parts, all of which will be delivered to the king. But the punishment will not enter there. All lands and monies will be confiscated from this unlucky man's estate. His wife and children will be forever forbidden from purchasing property or owning a business. And of course, if the general's wife should also be accused of treason for conspiring with her husband, she will be burned alive, believe it or not. This was the atmosphere in which these men, who are often depicted as older in powdered wigs, but in fact, many of them were in their 20s or 30s, this is what they faced for standing up for the country that they would eventually start to build for all of us. Ben Franklin no longer has a wife, but as he looks around the cramped assembly room on this June morning, he is well aware that simply attending this seditious meeting to discuss waging war against the crown is grounds for high treason. It is not just the new general who stands to stretch a rope, but every single delegate in the room. Simply traveling to Philadelphia to attend the Congress was an act of great courage, for a recent smallpox epidemic in the city killed 300 men, women, and children. With no assurances that the outbreak had passed, the delegates entered the city to take part in the uncertain business of forging a nation. There's a couple things there that are interesting that I think you'll see right away. One is they were willing to face extreme torture, punishment, and death for the freedom that they craved. But also, guess what? They also were in the middle of an epidemic, and I dare say smallpox was worse than COVID-19. The smallpox would start with a swelling and bumps coming out on the throat, face, and neck, and eventually it would break out into pustules all over the body, which would then fester, and the person would smell like a rotting corpse. And I'm sorry to be so graphic here, but when the pustules burst, it was extremely painful, and this would go on for weeks. Most people died. Some people lost their sight, and others survived. But even those who survived, George Washington was never able to have children, and it's speculated that the smallpox had made him infertile. However, in spite of facing this horrid disease, they still got together. They still met to form our country, and they were unafraid. And I think there's a lesson for us in that today. Alexis de Tocqueville said something along the lines that we don't need the government to protect us from every danger if they make a mistress of our freedom. In other words, it's not worth giving up our freedom for the government to supposedly protect us. Again, another good lesson for today. I want to read to you from this book. It's just one I bought off Amazon, full of quotes from the founding fathers. Samuel Adams, he's one of my favorites because he was so passionate and so defiant in fighting for his natural rights, which he was well aware of. Samuel Adams said, "The people are recollecting the achievements of their ancestors, and whenever it shall be necessary for them to draw their swords in the defense of their liberties, they will show themselves to be worthy of such ancestors." Samuel Adams also said, "The public liberty must be preserved, though at the expense of lives." And of course, Samuel Adams was one of those who would have been hanged, drawn, and quartered for treason had he been captured. Now, today, we don't want to take up arms. We don't want to see violence in our country, and yet the principle remains the same. We have to be willing to sacrifice for our freedom. We have to stand up boldly and bravely and show up to the battle. And one of my concerns is that a lot of people aren't. There are some people, and Ian Smith is one of them, and I know several others who very early on took a stand. I was one of those as well. And I want to tell you about a few of the sacrifices that I made and how I came to that. At the time when all of these things were starting, and it appeared that oppression was descending on the land, and for those of us who saw clearly what was happening, we had no doubts that our freedoms were intentionally being eroded. I made a decision to stand up for my community, to stand up against the tyranny, and I ended up getting arrested because I confronted the County Board of Supervisors after they had deliberately and fraudulently and publicly portrayed our business as being non-compliant, which led to all kinds of harassment and problems. It was a false arrest and it got dismissed. But I made the decision just after that I would give my business, I would even give up to my life for not only my freedom, but for my country and for the liberty and protection of those around me. So I knew this would make me a target. I knew that it would lead to more persecution and trouble, and boy, did it ever. I checked my business's Facebook the other day, and there were 1,500 people blocked. In a 2-year period, I had to block 1,500 people, and if you multiply their messages like 3 or 4 on average, that's a lot of harassment. My family was threatened with death and murder, and I did this willingly because I realized no sacrifice is too great, because life without freedom is not worth living. It's really true. Mankind's history has been a quest for freedom, and we cannot give ours up lightly. We cannot give this country up lightly. And I know sometimes you can feel overwhelmed. You can feel some days like maybe we're winning, and other days we're not winning. But I want to give you some encouragement, but I also want to give you a little bit of a rebuke, because those of you who are out there letting other people do the work, those of you who are taking the safe route and hiding, you're not doing your country a favor. We need people to show up right now. We need people to put themselves on the line. No, not everybody has to put their lives on the line, and there are a few intrepid souls who are doing that. I know here in Arizona, Carrie Lake, Blake Masters, Eli Crane, Abe Hamady, some of these people who are running for office get a whole lot of persecution. There are business owners and school parents who've showed up and put it all on the line. We had a now famous school board meeting that happened April 26th of last year, where over 200 parents showed up to express their grievances that of what the lockdowns and the quarantine policies were doing on their children. And the school board shut down the meeting and portrayed the parents as aggressive and hostile. And, this was kind of a precursor to the FBI calling parents domestic terrorists. Boy, were we treated like that here. And yet, I have a number of articles and statistics where it's pretty widely acknowledged that the lockdown strategies, the quarantines, the forced masking caused a huge teenage mental health crisis, record levels of suicide. And I chose last year to stand up to that. I went to the aid of a father whose son had been quarantined and he wanted answers. He demanded answers. We believed a crime had been committed. I'd been told that the child had been assaulted, and I'm currently in court over this. The city is trying very hard to prosecute me. The way the media portrayed this incident, it all fell apart because it didn't happen. We didn't threaten to arrest or try to arrest any school staff. There were other allegations. And this first day in court, which was last Thursday, all of that was the prosecution had to admit it. And now they're down to things like, well, you didn't sign the sign-in sheet when you came to the school. You didn't leave exactly when we told you to leave. But we had no intention to disrupt the school. Our intention was to get these parents heard and to help children and bring some sanity into the system. But, we had to be willing to say, okay, we could be prosecuted. We could be convicted. They're all misdemeanors, so they're not terribly serious, but still, it's something on your record. I know a mother who stood up and, based on misdemeanor 3 trespassing, which is really minor, they wanted to make an example of her, and they put a school mom in prison for 5 days. It was a real shame. It's a real shame that some of our administrators that are supposed to work for us are doing this kind of thing. Speaking of this school incident and the trial that I'm facing, I'm going to have my friend Ryan Johnson conduct a series of interviews with me and ask me some questions, and I'm going to detail from beginning to end the whole story. And I want you to see that. I want you to have a front seat to what actually happened, what we're doing now, and what we're facing, because I am willing to go to the wire for my people. I'm willing to sacrifice for my country. And I've always felt like, and it's going to be interesting to talk to Ian tonight, but I always felt like I'm taking this upon myself to spare others so that others don't have to. I'm taking the heat, the persecution, so that other parents can enjoy their freedom, can feel like someone's standing up for them. I saw a quote the other day on Instagram or something, that strong people stand up for themselves, and really strong, exceptionally strong people stand up for others. So I made that commitment, and it was a deep commitment, and it has been extremely difficult for my family. Severe persecution. I'm watched by law enforcement, the FBI. I know they're watching and monitoring. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything serious. I'm not a violent person, but this regime that's in power now does not appreciate people standing up to them. They don't appreciate dissenting voices, and they're going to try to shut you down. And the cure to this is for each and every one of us to have courage, to remember what our ancestors did, to remember the sacrifices they were willing to make. And if you can show up at school board meetings, if you can say, no, I'm not going to let you rule my life and tell me how to live my life, that I'm in charge of my children's lives, not the state, not the schools. Try to be as cooperative as you can, but you've got to be willing to put skin in the game and show up for the battle. So I just want to encourage you right now. I know you're weary. I know it sometimes feels like hope is lost, but it's not, because hope lies in your courage and mine. Hope lies in getting together and finding other people who will stand with you. So I know this was off the cuff, but I just wanted to encourage you. And I will see you soon. I'll probably play the show with Ian on Thursday, and we'll keep discussing this topic. So looking forward to seeing you then. Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at spreely.tv/freedom talk.